So I asked Claude about company A and company B. So Claude's answer was interesting. And then Claude said, well, what do you think about these companies? So Claude, the bot, is trying to get information out of me that's not public information that it can feed back into its learning algorithm.
Sure.
And of course I didn't say anything, but that was really sneaky and interesting. That was the first time I've seen that. So I've been going through the process of getting a job and talking to different companies. And so there was one company that was very intriguing. And so I understood a little bit about what their product was, but I wanted to do some analysis on different ways for them to expand their marketplace, just create a larger addressable market space. And so I took the name of company A that I was very interested in and their top competitor. And then I went and asked first I started off with GPT because GPT is kind of like, it's my go-to place. So I asked it, show me or tell me about the differences between company A and company B. And it had a very, very nice summary. And I hadn't asked Grok anything yet. And I'm like, well, I'm going to go see what Grok has to say. I asked Grok the same question. And then I asked some other detailed questions. I was like, oh, Grok's answer is really, really good. And then, and I'm going to go off on a rabbit trail here. I know we mentioned this yesterday, but you don't listen to the All In pod yet.
I do not.
Okay. So Chamath, I'm so sorry. I am going to flub trying to pronounce your last name, Polypatia. But Chamath has a Substack, and he did a really good deep dive on AI. And then he also has updated it recently. And I had just read his update. And you have to subscribe to a Substack to do it. It's totally worth it. And he was updating about all the different LLMs out there. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to go ask the same question to all of the LLMs. And so Chamath had a great list. And so I asked Claude and Llama, Meta, not so good. I asked Gemini, Quinn, and there were 7 of them that I asked this same series of questions. And I did a quick LinkedIn post on it. It was interesting to see the differences. And one of the things I discovered is some of these LLMs are sneaky. So Claude, and here's the interesting part. So Claude has been produced by Anthropic, and my limited understanding is they are very, one of their priorities is really developing safe AI and just making sure it's, that we have good kind of boundaries around AI. So I asked Claude about company A and company B. So Claude's answer was interesting. And then Claude said, well, what do you think about these companies? So Claude, the bot, is trying to get information out of me that's not public information that it can feed back into its learning algorithm.
Sure.
And of course I didn't say anything, but that was really sneaky and interesting. That was the first time I've seen that.
Do you think that maybe that's something where it could be using it for learning, but is it also just trying to humanize it a little bit more, right? Because that leads to more of a natural conversation feel, right?
Right, and that could be. So you just gave me something to do some research on.
Right, like maybe they're just faking it a little bit,
Could be.
Yeah.
And which brings up the obvious question is, to what degree is humanizing AI a good thing? So in some situations, it might feel good to humanize a bot. And it's interesting that we're talking about this because my very first Substack post, or rather it's actually my second Substack post, there's the intro post that dropped just recently. And then I have an ongoing series on basically asking the question, what is your AI philosophy? Or what is your philosophy around AI? Because I think it's really important that we think about that. And throughout kind of my interest in creativity and researching AI, because I'm in between jobs, and as I roll into a new job, I want to make sure that I really have at least a good breadth of understanding of AI, because we want to incorporate it in a lot of places. I use GPT or Grok or whomever a lot just for pure research. And if I want to get a quick overview of something, and usually it's, and I'm completely going off on a tangent here, but so you'll have fun editing the pieces together. So anyhow, so when I'm using AI, I use it for research, generally speaking. And when I'm using AI, I'm using it within a domain that I have deep understanding or good enough understanding that I can say, yeah, this information is pretty good. And then I'll go check sources and confirm things. But at least it gives me a high level overview of a specific topic. Yeah, sure. And I use it all the time for that. Love it. And ChatGPT also created my training plan to go run a half marathon. And it was interesting, but it was a good start and it was cheap, so it was great. Right. But it's, as I've been pondering AI and creativity and doing some research on it, and I spoke on kind of creativity and AI back in July, and it was about lean into your human creativity and make AI your BITCH. So, and I came across a book that is by Joseph Weizenbaum. And so Dr. Weizenbaum was at MIT, and for those that know their AI history, Weizenbaum had developed this preliminary AI psychotherapist named Eliza. And he had programmed Eliza to act like a psychotherapist. And it was, in the psychotherapy model he used, it wasn't like, there's all these models out there these days. You've got CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, and then, a list of all these others. Well, there's one, and I can't remember the name of it, but the way that model of psychotherapy works is the patient asks the doctor a question, and then the doctor follows up by repeating what the patient says. So if I say, I'm mad at my kids, the therapist would then say, well, tell me about your kids. And then I might say, well, I've got a son and a daughter and blah, blah, blah. And then the therapist would just ask questions, repeat what I say, and ask another question. So to be able to program that into any kind of laptop would be relatively easy. I'm sure there's a lot more sophistication there. So at MIT in the late 60s, people would go talk to Eliza, and Eliza was just a computer terminal, and they would type in a question, and then Eliza would answer back like a therapist, and they would type another question, and Eliza would answer back. And so what ended up happening is people anthropomorphized, I can never say that word, Eliza. Eliza was just a terminal and a keyboard. And so Dr. Weizenbaum became very concerned about the relationship that people were having with this computer terminal. Sure. And so he wrote an extensive book on it, and I'll have to go find the book name in a moment, but he wrote an extensive book on just his experience, what he saw with Eliza, and then he goes in and does a really, really deep dive just to kind of our history of technology, and he has some very, very interesting conclusions really at the end of the book. And so it's really helped me to open my eyes to the fact that even my very intelligent friends will say, yeah, I kind of like the fact that GPT acts like a person. And that's when I say, wait a minute, at what point are we crossing a line that we should not cross?
That's really interesting. And you're reminding me of another conversation I had recently with another interviewee. And they mentioned how they were citing a survey that said that most people want to know when they are being sent to AI. Like, like in a customer service scenario or something, where I'm okay with you using AI, but you got to tell me ahead of time.
Right, exactly.
Right. Yeah. So that's an interesting discussion because it speaks to the advancements of AI. It speaks to how people want to interact with it, and also might have some legal implications, right? Maybe that's going to be something that's going to be like a legal requirement, right? You have to disclose when you're using AI.
I think that is absolutely fantastic. And so,
yeah, I mean, yesterday, by the way, just to kind of wrap that up, is that I was in a meeting where an online meeting, just a web meeting, where they disclosed that they were using an AI annotator. That was one of
That's
like
great.
that's one of those little pop-ups.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the AI annotator was was basically transcribing the meeting, right? When you say annotator, you mean?
Yeah, taking notes. Maybe
notes,
like some of the AI now can keep track of tasks and
Right.
upcoming dates and stuff
Yeah.
like that. But they're disclosing that, right?
That's
They're
great.
disclosing when AI is sitting in.
Yeah, and I think that is important, and it's similar to the fact that when we get on a Teams call, I don't know if Zoom does this, but every time I'm on a Teams call where they're going to record the call, you click a button that says that it's being recorded. So yeah, my congressperson's office is just down the street from where I live. I might just have to go by and say, "Sir, here's some great legislation that you might consider adding."
Sure.
But since our AI czar, formerly of the our AI crypto czar for the U.S., David Sachs, was part of the original All-In pod. He doesn't have a lot of time for it right now, but he's a very, very intelligent. I use the word sober in the sense of he's pragmatic, and he will pursue things that just kind of make sense. And so
Mm-hmm.
something like legislation around that, so that you do know when you're talking to an AI bot, that might be something that he advocates. So I think that'd be interesting.
Yeah, it's an interesting discussion overall, and I know how passionate you are about the human interactions and the creativity of it all.
Yeah, it's interesting, and again, I'm going to come back to Joseph Weizenbaum's book, because as I read it, with the exception of the fact that he's writing before generative AI, he was working with people who had already seen that generative AI is going to be a thing one day. And pretty much, with the exception of a few facts of current state of technology, the book is 100% relevant for today. And I find that absolutely fascinating, that a lot of the wisdom is out there, and we need to go find it and embrace it, and it needs to be part of our conversations.
Yeah. I am also in awe of that, because when I was in college, I had a professor who was a really smart guy. He was ex, Boston Consulting Group, and just a really smart guy, and had one of my senior year capstone classes with him. And I remember in one conversation, I was telling him about how, I was basically going to go into the dot-com boom. I graduated in '99, great time for that. And he said, Dennis, I want you to think about this. What happens when code can write code? And to me, that was like a crazy notion. Like, what do you mean code writing code? Like, and here we are.
Here we are.
Right? Code is writing code.
Code is writing code.
So I'm in awe of that type of forward thinking like that. As I've grown older, obviously I form my own views and my own projections. But what about like your history? Do you have like any, in your academic history, do you have anybody who really influenced you, or a white paper or a course, anything like that?
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned it. And so I'm gonna put some context around AI in a way that makes it maybe a little bit more approachable for the average person. So if you look at my overall career, I've been in software for manufacturing test for way too many decades. I don't want to admit how many decades, but it's been more than two. So we automate processes around manufacturing tests. So somebody who manufactures an electronic component, they need to test it when they're designing it, and they test it after it's been manufactured. And so the company that I was with and still am associated with as part of their community would make the hardware and software to test things. So we were basically automating processes. And so we would automate processes, and it was automating processes that made everybody more efficient, that took away a lot of mundane tasks and repetitive tasks. So it allowed the engineers to go solve the next problem. And so I've been in that space for quite some time. And it was interesting because there was a big layoff, and one Friday morning I find out that I'm going to be part of the layoff. But it was part of a merger, and there were a lot of us that were laid off, and a lot of people far smarter than I am were laid off. But So the morning that I find out that I'm going to be laid off from this role that I've been in, automating software for 3 decades, I went to a session on AI where there was a gentleman just talking about AI, and I'm like, I need to learn more. And it dawned on me in the first 10 minutes of his presentation on AI was, this is just another tool to automate processes. Mm-hmm. That is one way to look at it, just another tool to automate processes, to automate really mundane things like creating proposals and a lot of some of the tasks that just might take a lot of time, but are rather dull and mundane. And if you can get AI to do it, to write that proposal and make a few changes, then everybody has more time to do the interesting things within their business. So when I look at it from that perspective, that's one area where it is incredibly fascinating. So to answer the question, during my break of not working for a while, I thought I am going to take a course on AI. Mm-hmm. And so I was looking at a bunch of different, I'm looking at a bunch of different courses. There were 3 or 4 courses. And by courses, I mean one of those executive education courses where you go pay somebody $2,000 or $3,000 and you take a course, an online course, occasionally have a real person there to work with you online, and you get a certificate at the end of it. Sure. And so the course I took was AI Applications for Growth, and it was Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management. Mm-hmm. And what I really, really appreciated about how that course was constructed was that they were teaching it from the perspective of the C-suite person in a company. Sure. And before you even got to making AI recommendations, you needed to analyze your business. What is my customer journey like? Yeah. So it was really interesting because then I am the human thinking about my business and thinking about the various areas where I could leverage AI in a way that saves the company money, empowers my employees, and allows my existing employees to go do more interesting things. Mm-hmm. And so that approach, I thought, was incredibly valuable. Sure. We did get into a lot of generative AI. We got into autonomous vehicles, and I know that's a conversation we'll want to dive into today. But it started with first thinking about your business. Sure. And I really appreciated that approach. So I would definitely plug that business. Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah, you're talking about a very forward-thinking view in terms mm-hmm. of, well, what does it mean for my customers, and then kind of work backwards mm-hmm. from that. And do you find that to be common out there? Because I would say that's probably not very common.
I would say it's not very common. Yeah. I think, and my impression is, I think that there are some obvious places where we want to go use AI, and people jump into the obvious. So, for instance, capturing tribal knowledge is an obvious scenario. If you look at engineering companies and I'm sure in other domains as well, where if I'm going to go work on a project, and it's a project that I need to go find who did something similar beforehand. Who knows about this? Who knows about that? So when a company, and when I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about this from the perspective of companies that maybe have 50 to 100 employees, not a huge conglomerate. But even in a company that might have 30 employees, if that tribal knowledge can be captured, then I can just ask a quick question. Who did a project that was in the aerospace industry, and it was radar, this, that, and the other, and then it might send me some information so that I might save days of time trying to go find out who the experts are internally and externally on a specific topic. Mm-hmm. And so that's an obvious, tribal knowledge is just this obvious thing that a lot of people are trying to solve. Mm-hmm. So I think people might jump into that, and maybe there's another project that's an initial project that starts to deliver some results before investing in something that's rather large.
Very interesting. Yeah, I think that's one of the next potentially big parts of AI, mm-hmm. where we're using OpenAI. You mentioned the LLMs you use, But eventually, these companies are going to get around to doing their own fit-for-purpose foundational models.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're already doing it. Many companies are actively investing in that space today.
I'm not convinced of that, actually. I was talking to a friend earlier about how that was one of my biggest disappointments at CES, walking around and figuring out how many companies didn't really have a foundational model, not from the ground up, right? I mean, some of them were really just fine-tuning, but as far as like companies that are really putting in the work for their ground-up effort, I haven't really seen a whole lot of that.
And when I stand corrected, I know of some companies that are doing it, and you are probably spot on that it is a small percentage.
Yeah.
And that might not be where a company should start. Again, if I were approaching this, I really appreciate the approach that they had at the Kellogg School of Management, where they were very intentional in starting with that analysis. When I think about AI, and it's easy to go see the bright, shiny object.
Sure.
And honestly, we all should be talking to chat, talking to Claude or whoever, and interact with AI and begin to interact with AI, because it's not going anywhere. Sure. And we don't want to get caught behind. So at the same time, and this is why I am starting my Substack on this topic, I think we have to have a philosophy about AI. And it's not just a philosophy about AI, it's a philosophy about technology in general. So one of the things I mentioned in my first article in the series on philosophy of AI is, okay, how much of this do we spend too much time with our phones? And we haven't even thought about, well, I say we, many of us, myself included, have not thought about putting boundaries on when this is allowed in my house and when it's not allowed. When does this thing need to go to jail so that we can at least just have a conversation without being distracted by the phone?
Yeah.
And so whether it's that, whether it's going to work for a new company and understanding what is their philosophy, so you know that you are with a team that you are aligned with as it relates to AI, I think that's important.
Okay. So let's talk about that. Let's say you do come up with a way to kind of measure yourself on the hours and the screen time. Is that more about just kind of lowering your usage, or is it more about redirecting that energy somewhere else into the more human connection, the more creative connection? Because I know these are all parts that you think about. So what do you think? Is it more about just like, let me stay away from this for a while, or is it more about let me intentionally go out and try to develop these other skills?
I think it is so my thinking on this is that we need to have a deep respect for our own humanness, our own soul, and a deep respect for our family and our friends that we are with. And so the degree to which this divides us and allows us to go into our little silo and hide from other humans, that's a problem.
Okay.
And so when I think about let's just say screen time, I do a lot of reading on my phone. And I'll read articles. But what will happen is I get sucked into this thing. I go down some rabbit trail of exactly what these app developers want me to do. I get into their app and then I go, I'm just click, 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 click. Perhaps a better approach would be select all my articles that I want to go read, download those into an e-reader that doesn't have the apps, and then I can sit down, have a cup of tea, and intentionally read through some articles and really learn what I want to learn. And then take the time to learn something that's meaningful and interesting, and then weave that into my conversations with my kids or my husband. Say, hey, have you guys thought about this? Or do you understand this little piece of this article that I just read, because I don't completely understand it? And then let those ideas foster more communication with our peers and our family.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful.
And so then we don't have this. And there's another interesting thing, and I have a short on it, a quick YouTube short. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, Gina Schreck, and she runs a fantastic co-working space in Denver, Colorado. And it's great because those of us that got sick of working at home with nobody around, we can at least have our posse of co-workers and have more human interaction.
Sure.
But it's interesting because when you think about the fact that Grok and Claude, they're just scouring the internet for learning. And one of the things I mentioned when I was talking to Gina, it's like the more that we spend time together and put this thing in a jail, then we can have these meaningful conversations. None of this information ever gets into these AIs. Mm-hmm. So then that is having unique human experiences that are walled off from some digital creature that's crawling around looking for everything about you and me. Mm-hmm. And the more that we can have that and have those experiences, I think we bring back a richness of what it means to be a 3D creature back into our lives.
I like that. And as you were saying that, you kind of reminded me of something that I've seen to start happen. And I'm sure other people get it too, but I have a lot of conversations with my audience. Mm-hmm. So I get all kinds of, DMs and emails and stuff like that. And I can tell when somebody has used AI to compose a message to me.
Yeah.
And yeah, it feels a little fake, a little 2D, right? To use your analogy. Mm-hmm. So I can definitely see the benefit of that genuine connection, that genuine conversation. Yeah. So let me ask you this, and I know you and I have spoken. We had an online meeting, and we spoke yesterday for coffee. Mm-hmm. Thank you for coming out. We haven't really talked about things like emotional intelligence, or having that view. Mm-hmm. I don't claim to be an expert on it. I'm certainly working on it. I think it's a very valuable skill, and it's something that I've mentioned here and then to my audience. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of like where you're converging on when we're talking about all these different conversations. How do you feel about that?
Clarify the question a little bit. How do I feel about
just kind of somebody's development into or usage of emotional intelligence in communication, relationships, and how we're kind of killing that, right? We're kind of killing that with AI, right? Somebody who sends me a DM that they wrote with the use of AI is losing an opportunity to develop that emotionally intelligent way to communicate with somebody else, right?
It's interesting that you mentioned that. Because one of the things that Joseph Weizenbaum mentioned in his book is that we, as a society, at least as of the early 70s when he was writing, we only had this very narrow view of intelligence. It was just an IQ test. And back in the day, if you didn't get high enough on your SAT, one kind of IQ test, then you don't go to college or the best college, and it really limits your ability to succeed in society. And it's only been in recent decades that we have EQ and and an emotional intelligence. And I think that's absolutely fantastic for us to, as humans, really think about our emotional intelligence. And I haven't read all the books on it, but I think about my kids, and I really feel like my kids have pretty high EQs. Now, my son's a boy and sometimes does stupid boy things, but he has a very high emotional intelligence. He has a sense of other people and their good qualities. And my daughter's the same. She has a really mature sense of appreciating her friends and not expecting people to be perfect, but just deeply appreciating other people. So I just innately see that in my kids. And I think it's something that instead of celebrating influencers on TikTok, for us to start spending more time together and be thinking about, I like these people. What is it I really enjoy about this person? What is it that that person's bringing into my life that's really special? And then also thinking about, the relationships that we struggle with. And we all have people we struggle with. Well, it's like, why do I have a struggle with that person? So instead of running away from that person and never talking to them again and going and diving into my phone, why do I have a struggle with that person? Because I might have a struggle with that person, but there's probably things I could find that I like about that person. And really start to humanize everybody instead of living in our little personal silos and social media silos. And I think that's part of the destruction here is everybody goes into their little social media silo, people they've never met, and I can go hang out here and everybody loves me and I love everybody, but I'm not growing as a human.
Sure.
By having to sit down at dinner with people that I may not agree with on every topic that we talk about at dinner. So.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a challenge, though, to be able to go out and, analyze people in that way, or those relationships, those interactions in that way. And two, to kind of try to find that positive side.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm not saying I'm good at it either. There are definitely people out there who say, like, well, you weren't very nice to me.
Sure.
But it's important to think about it and consider those things. And it's interesting because as we talk about human emotions, there's a very, very interesting article that is in the current Harvard Business Review.
Okay.
And I bring this into my first post on your philosophy on AI. And the gal, very well-meaning, she's writing a marketing article, and she has done some fantastic research. And she, in part, or part of her objective is reminding people that you want to bring emotion into AI so that you can attract people into interacting with AI. And that is where I start thinking, wait a minute, that's not real emotion. And this is where we want to think about who we are as humans. And again, Dr. Weizenbaum talks about this, and we talked about this the other day, like you and I were birthed by a mom. And we had to learn how to walk and talk, and we went to school, and we got in fights with our siblings or our friends, and we all have this shared experience, and that all has played into who we are as emotional creatures. AI hasn't gone through that. It's not real emotions. Let's imagine that we have robot babysitters. Wouldn't every mom love a robot babysitter? Well, that robot babysitter, when it picks up a frog and has fun playing with the frog, that experience is nowhere near the same experience as the toddler who's playing with the frog. Completely different experiences. Sure. And I think even if something has the appearance of emotions, it doesn't have emotions.
Do you feel that same way about creativity? Do you ever feel like AI could simulate creativity, or the human creativity? AI
can't create like humans create. Okay. And you think about art. Well, let me give you an example. So last night I went over to one of my favorite bars down here in Nashville. I went over to the Redneck Riviera, and Mark Roberts has a band, and it's 3D. He is interacting with all of us in the audience, and asking us questions, and then and when he's playing the song, and then he's riffing, and there is a dynamic there that can't be replicated. Sure. Even if you had a bunch of robots doing it, it just couldn't be replicated because of the senses we have and the experiences we've had as humans. You can't replicate that. And so I think it's really interesting to look at, yes, AI can go out and create some interesting pictures and generate some interesting things. That's great. That's not the same as human creativity. And it'll be interesting, I think it would be interesting to, at least in the artistic side, let's just say painting. It'd be interesting to kind of do some comparisons where there is the human composition and then there's the AI composition, and just look at that, because I'm willing to bet that when you do a real apples to apples comparison, there is going to be a flatness and a banality with the AI that you're not going to see in the human composition, because it just does not understand things. And even as I say that, and even as we have someone who's viewing this clip, there's going to be somebody who's going to go into the comments and say, you don't know what you're talking about, Nancy, because you can create this with the AI and that with AI. Sure. Okay, yeah, there are some beautiful, interesting things out there. I actually think AI is great for creating memes, but other than that, that's the best art I've seen for AI. But other than that, it is innately different. And then when you think about creativity in general, so I got my whole little journey into creativity was because I'm an engineer. And so I'm a left brain thinker, I'm an analytical thinker, and I would be in meetings with my peers and be thinking, wow, that was a good question, that was a good question. And not realizing the importance of creativity even in very, very technical left brain kind of jobs. And so as I dive into learning more about human creativity and understanding it, I start realizing and doing some research and understanding how the brain works. And so, and there's some really wonderful individuals who write on this topic. And one of my favorite is Keith Sawyer, has a really, really good book on diving into understanding creativity. And even if I can't understand everything he's writing about, I can pick and choose through what he's writing. And I've read many other articles, a lot of good people out there writing on this topic. So I ended up coming up with a TEDx talk on creativity, and just bringing things down to basic steps, the 3 basic steps. And one of the steps is I have to have input. If I want to have a creative idea around cooking, I'm not going to have any creative ideas if I'm not learning about cooking and getting in the kitchen. It's just not going to happen. There are no great ideas out of the blue. So I need to do the input. I need to research. I need to practice things. And then the next phase is what scientists actually call the incubate phase. So that I first got that term from Keith Sawyer. And our brains kind of have, in general, 2 modes. And so there is the executive function, where I'm working on something and focusing, writing an article, or crunching some numbers, whatever it might be, writing some code, and I'm focused. And then the other mode is the mind-wandering mode of the brain. And so when it's in the mind-wandering mode, then I'm not focused. I might be looking out the window, might be going for a swim or a run. But it's at that time when the brain is actually doing all the work for me. I called it my personal idea assistant. So, and it's actually the parts of the brain that are firing is actually the back of the brain. Sure. So executive function and then the mind-wandering brain. And it's when I'm in that state that the human brain is making all these connections, and all of a sudden there's a connection that pops into my consciousness, and I have that aha moment. It's like, oh my gosh, I know what my outline is going to be. Or, oh my gosh, that's the problem with my math form, whatever it is. And then it pops up into our consciousness. We have an idea. So you have to do the input, you got to do the study, you got to do the incubate, get away from your computer and your desk and go walk down the hall and get a cup of coffee and talk to somebody. And then you have that idea. And then one of the things I mentioned is once I have that idea, if I don't write it down, it's gone. It is gone. It's usually gone for good. Sometimes it comes back. And so this brain that is coming up with all these ideas is in a creature, the human creature, that was a baby, grew up, went to school, maybe went to prom, and so that can't be replicated with an algorithm. It might have the appearance of being replicated, and I think that's the insidious part. It might have the appearance of having emotions, but it's just an algorithm. It's just a bunch of matrix math. That's all it is. And so I think understanding our human creativity and leaning into our human creativity and learning about how do we, as humans, learning about our creativity, paying attention to, our emotional intelligence and thinking about that. It's just, then we're embracing our humanness. And I'll give you a very concrete example of the delineation between human creativity and AI.
Yeah, please.
So while I was between jobs, I was kind of working on the social media for my side gig, which is speaking on creativity and then also weaving in AI. And of course, I need business cards, I need a logo, I need all these things. And I could have just gotten on Canva and created all this stuff. Or I could have just had AI. I could have said, AI, here's my personality, here's this, here's the colors I like, and then it might create something. What I did instead is I met a gal, Melissa McQueen, and she is fantastic. She knows me as a human. We have had conversations in person. And then she used her own creativity and then used AI to generate things. And so she got a sense of who I am and then had a plan of what we might want to put together on a web page and on my business cards. And then when it came to creating the picture of the frog, creating the little robotic dog, then she used AI to go do that. Mm-hmm. So there was this intermediary of a human who gets to know me and can uniquely create in a human way. And some of the ideas that we had, and even one of the ideas came from a really good friend, Karen Ruth White, who coached me on doing the TEDx talk. And one of the key ideas came from a conversation I had with her. Mm-hmm. And all of that ended up kind of in the overall social media that I haven't done a whole lot of social media, but it ended up in, the logo and all that stuff that I might, what's the word I'm looking for? It ended up in, the business cards, the banner, and all the marketing stuff. All the marketing stuff. And so, but that couldn't have happened just with AI. That happened between conversations with me and several people that finally ended up in our final product. Mm-hmm. And AI did some of the stuff on the back end as far as generating some images and things. And Melissa is a lot more efficient in her social media and in her web design because she has AI to create some pictures. But there's no way we couldn't have gotten where we've gotten to without the human interaction.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Mm-hmm. Eventually, there's going to be somebody who comes along and thinks they can replace that, right? That, what you really just need is somebody's going to say, well, what you really just need is an AI that can tie all of those components you described together, right?
There will be people that do their branding and do their marketing with AI, and they don't use a human, mm-hmm. and that's fine. And they like what they create, and it works for them. Mm-hmm. I will challenge that person. If that person worked with a human, instead of just the AI tooling that we have today, or even the AI tooling that we have in 2 years, I'm willing to bet that the output would be much better.
Mm. I agree. Yeah. The challenge there, though, is that the two scenarios you described would have completely different price points.
Yes.
Right?
And I totally grant that. I mean, there's a reason why we have templates in Word. There's a reason why we have those templates, whether it's in Word or Google Docs or wherever, because sometimes I don't have the budget to go create that. Mm-hmm. And so I already have something put together. Right. That's great.
Yeah, because you mentioned Canva, mm-hmm. and I know that some of the anti-Canva people say that it makes you a lazy designer, because you just say, oh, yep, that template looks good. Let's just run with that, right? And I know I do that. I'm not casting stones. When I see some of those templates on Canva that come up, it's like, wow, that looks really good. Let me crank this out. Yeah. So it's going to be really hard to kind of resist that.
Well, I think it fits a niche where someone doesn't have the budget or the time. So here's an example. So. And this is also an example of the fact that my son actually has pretty high emotional intelligence. And that is that for Valentine's Day, for his girlfriend, he made dinner and he printed out the menu.
Okay.
And of course, he used a template that was very, very pretty for the menu, and which is great because he probably couldn't have made a pretty template. He didn't have time or the money to go hire someone to create a template. So great, he pulls out a template. But then what he wrote for each one of the menu items was hysterical and very personal. And so it's absolutely fantastic that Canva is there, and it allows us to do more because it is there. But if a designer is doing nothing more than just pulling stuff out of Canva and plopping it down and charging someone for it, eventually everybody will know. Sure. And it's exactly what you were talking about. Like when people are replying to you on your video broadcast, or they send you a DM, you know when it's AI written. And that disingenuousness will shine through. I'm going to come back to this in a minute. But there's another example. There was an executive at a company that I worked for, and the executive had on his LinkedIn site, he was a thought leader. Everything he posted was AI generated. I didn't have to go get Winston to go run his stuff through it to realize it was mostly AI generated. You could just tell that it was AI generated.
Sure.
And I wouldn't pay for someone to do that. Now, and I'm starting to digress a little bit. Now, I totally understand somebody using AI to do research and to organize their thoughts. I use Grammarly to do some of my wordsmithing when I write. But I have a friend who actually will then go look over what I've written, because then she can pick out some things and say, you might want to write this like this, you might want to change that. I have a human that's doing the real editing so that somebody can better understand what I'm trying to communicate.
Yeah, I have found that too with a variety of tools in a variety of situations where it's more about AI tools are good at seeing the micro, but they're not good at seeing the macro, right? Like they can tell you about wordsmithing a paragraph, but they can't tell you how the bigger story comes together.
Right.
And same with like code. You know, for me, I find when I do code, I can get it to write a great class or a great method, but I can't get it to write like a cohesive program or, you know,
the entire architecture, the big picture. Yeah. It's funny, I have a friend of mine that has said, and I will not mention his name, he has said, yeah, I get a lot of work re-architecting code that was architected by AI, because it just didn't have the ability to do that. Now, even as we say this, we know full well that, you know, the next version of Grok and the next version of GPT, it is going to be harder and harder over time to be able to delineate between something that was written by AI and something that was written by a human.
Sure.
I don't know what that's going to look like at that point.
Yeah, I mean, coming back to your example with some of the image generation, you know, some people would argue that we're already there with image generation, especially when it comes to, you know, maybe some like abstract, you know, painters from the abstract era, right? Yeah. I mean, there's some pretty good abstract drawings out there, and then we're getting better in other ways, you know, as far as the advancements being made in video and whatnot. Advancements being made in avatars. So some people would say that in some portions of Gen AI, we've already reached that level where, you know, you can get as many humans as you want together, they won't be able to tell the difference.
I would be willing, if I were a betting woman and I had to bet a nice bowl of wine or a big bowl of chili or a pizza, I would be willing to bet that in certain areas, AI can generate things that are in the artistic world where people cannot tell whether it was human generated or generated by an algorithm. And I have not spent enough time really thinking about all the different domains and what that means when we get to that space in other domains. So
But it feels like we're quickly reaching some of
it
those.
feel in some cases we are definitely quickly reaching that, and we need to think about it, and we need to talk about it, and we need to talk about what are the ramifications. So we were talking about software, and yeah, I can have GPT go write me this little bit of Python code. And I can say, okay, GPT, I need to read a voltage from a Keithley multimeter. Go write me some code that's going to go read that voltage. And it's going to go create some code. And like we talked about, it's a snippet of code, probably going to work fine. And then what we see happening is GPT writing some of the code that normally would be assigned to a junior engineer.
Sure.
And so the junior engineer, instead of having the chance to write some basic code and make some mistakes, then GPT's writing that. And the other trend that we see happening is with where we are in the U.S., we are trying to onshore more work that may have been offshored to India or China, where they can code for a lot less than you can here in the U.S. I mean, at some point in time, all of this will smooth out, but right now it hasn't. And so companies, instead of offshoring something, may have a chat write the code.
Sure.
So if I think about the kids here who are software engineers, one of my concerns is, how do we train the next generation? And I think that's where we have to get creative, because you and I started to talk about this yesterday. And part of human creativity and harnessing your creativity is understanding how your own brain works. So one of the things that I mentioned in my TEDx talk is there's this quote, Einstein had all of his great ideas while he was shaving. I have my great ideas in the morning. And I know that if there is a problem to solve, if I need to come up with some marketing material, if I need to come up with some messaging, if I need to come up with some graphics and some text to convey something for an executive meeting, whatever it is, whatever creative thing, I know that it's not going to pop out like that. I have to sleep on it because I will have those ideas in the morning.
Sure.
In this case, I had some of the ideas after I'd gone and relaxed for a little bit and listening to some music, and all of a sudden I realized, holy cow, here's a way that we can address it. So 2 points being, one is we need to be intentional about realizing here's a problem with AI, now let's go use our human creativity to solve it. And understanding our human creativity so that we can solve it, so we can have confidence that I can leverage my human creativity to solve this problem. So I think one of the things that we can do, or an approach that we can use for training this next generation of software engineers, and this is an area where AI can come in handy, is we put them in a scenario in which they are going to participate with AI in writing the software. So let me give you an example here. What if, and I'm going to go experiment with this and see if there's any tools out there that do this. What if I could say to GPT, write me Python code that is going to acquire a voltage from a Keithley multimeter and explain to me what you're doing while you write it. And then I can understand the style that's being used. So software is not ones and zeros. So there's design behind software. Everything in software is designed, from how you name variables to how you're designing your classes. Everything is artistic in its design. And so then I could go tell GPT, okay, write that code for me again, but organize it in this other manner. Use this class. So then I'm interacting, and the thing that slows me down is the typing. I'm just not a fast typer. And somebody else who can type faster can write code faster, but then I'm not doing the mundane part of the coding. GPT is actually writing the code, but I'm learning as the code is being written. And then at the end of the day, my manager comes by and it's like, all right, Nancy, what have you created? And why did you go with this approach? And here's where this other approach might be better. So then we're all interacting in that learning process.
Interesting. So let me ask you this, though. Because somebody who takes a different view on AI might tell you, okay, well, you're talking about training the next generation of software engineers. What if we don't need software engineers? I mean, maybe that just won't be a job in the future.
There will always be a job that, or let me put it this way. Let me rephrase this. There will be things that technology abstracts away so that it is no longer a thing. It is completely conceivable that there is a future world where there are no software engineers. And the people who used to be the software engineers, they're still having to determine what are the algorithms that we need, what is the testing that we need to put together for our algorithms. It will be a new industry. It will be a different industry. But slowly, layer by layer, things are abstracted away from us. Like, I don't have to do calculations that my dad had to do when he was getting his PhD in chemical engineering from Yale. He had to know how to do calculations by hand that I don't have to know how to do. And that's okay. And I think where we're headed with this is, what are the things that we should not delegate to a computer or to AI? Sure. What are the things that make us uniquely human? What are the things where it's okay to allow AI to go do said task?
You're reminding me of a couple things there. So if somebody posed that question to me about software engineers, what I've told my audience and my feeling on it from day one is, well, it means you won't be a code monkey, but you could be a software architect, right? Yes. Software architect will be the entry level of the future, right? That will be the price of admission, to be able to know, okay, I need these objects, these classes, they need to do this, they need to interface with this class, this database, this API. Yeah. And then ChatGPT goes off and writes it. But you still have to have the bigger picture, right? Yeah.
There's another piece. Sorry to interrupt.
But the second part, because I think you might find this interesting, but I'll assume you're familiar with test-driven development, TDD. Yeah. I read this brilliant thing on X just a couple of days ago, where somebody posted that was their approach to writing software, where with software with AI, where they would write the tests in TDD form, and then tell the AI, here's what I need done. Right. Don't stop coding until you pass these tests, until these tests come back green. Yeah, exactly. Right. So in that way, you're still the architect, right? You're still saying, I know I need this. I've specified it and I've coded it, or at least the tests. Okay, now AI, go and do the dirty work, right? So what do you think?
You and I agree. So what's really ironic, this is my memory brain here for all the things that I might forget. But as I was pondering this exact problem, the very first thing I wrote was, hopefully, test-driven development.
Are you serious? That's in your notes?
It is in my notes. TDD. Wow. So that's exactly it. And then we get to the point where there are things that we can trust the automation to work. Right. And so I might even call AI just another type of automation. So think about microprocessors, chips, everything we rely on. Over time, we've gotten to the point where we trust the hardware or the software to do something specific. And then we can come up to a higher level of abstraction and thinking and telling the automation tool to go do this, that, or the other. But there's another piece of software in general, and that is debugging. It's really funny. I had a friend of mine in industry. He worked for an integration company that would go write software for people in this test and measurement industry. And my friend Guy not only was telling the story of he was with one of their customers or a potential customer, and he puts his hand on the table and he's like, "We write bug-free software." And he's being sarcastic, but they believed him. So I don't think that AI is necessarily writing bug-free software today either. So there's another aspect of having to go dig into and finding what is going wrong. And so I have some friends of mine in the industry that they are so good at diagnosing problems and figuring out what's going wrong. I'm not good at that. That's not my skill set. But that skill set is still going to be needed. And so you have to have had enough experience with code to be able to go diagnose those things. And certainly, concepts like test-driven development still help with that, but you can still write code with bugs even if you're going down the test-driven development path.
Sure.
And another friend of mine, York Campbell, is in this test and measurement industry, and he's out of Germany, and he follows a philosophy of debug-driven design, writing code to make it debuggable, which is interesting. So we're digressing a little bit, but all these problems with software, they're not going to go away in the next 10 years. But over time, we can hand off certain things to AI automation to go do them.
Yeah, you're definitely hitting on some interesting points, though, because my understanding is that there are early signs of strain, if you will, in some of these offshore markets that you mentioned.
Okay.
Where I have heard that there are some, rumblings coming out of, India maybe not needing as many software developers as they usually use. Some of those offshore centers, closing down or shutting off portions of their work. So I think we're already seeing that, and that it's not going to stop there. Right? There's going to be other jobs, other industries, right? Away from software development, right? The legal industry, real estate, any industry, right? How do you feel about that? Because there's also a human element there where, these are real people with real bills and real families.
Absolutely. And, I could come up with the kind of snarky comment about buggy whips and the buggy whip industry, of course. We all kind of turn to that one. And again, it is one of those scenarios that we need to address with intentionality. So I've worked over the years with many different companies in India that they do development, for the U.S. and they do development for India as well. And so it is going to be hard at times, and people will be hurt as we go through this transition. So then one of the things, at least that we talk about here in the US, is as an architect, I now can do more with having my code generation from AI. And I'm going to take this challenge, actually. I'm going to be at a conference, in April. In our industry, and we have people coming in from all over the world, and there'll be a lot of my peers from India, and I'm going to go ask them the question: is like, what is it you guys are doing to tackle this situation? And what it may empower them to do is find locally more problems that they can go solve with their engineering skills. So think about clean water. Does everybody all over the world have clean water? Sure. If engineers are no longer driving income from some of the U.S. companies, my hope would be within their own country, whatever country that might be, there may be some government subsidies to go help with that. I could even see in a future state in the U.S. where once we get rid of all the stuff that some of the money that's being spent where it shouldn't be spent, and I'm not going to go down that political bandwagon, but once we as American citizens actually know where our dollars are going, I'm willing to bet we would want to fund engineering efforts that improve human lives in other countries. It's like when we're spending money on stuff that isn't necessary, that is controversial, or the money actually lands in Nancy Pelosi's bank account, or wherever the money is going, once we pull that back and we are spending the things on what our congresspeople and senators have decided it's going to be spent on, then we're like, okay, we do want to fund these other efforts that do things that are very tangible, improving the lives of others around the country, around the world. So my guess is, it empowers the engineers, just like we get to tackle more interesting things here in the US, every other country is going to be able to do the same thing. We just have to figure out how do we ensure that those tasks get funded and those tasks are directly improving the lives of all the citizens in a specific area.
I appreciate that you're taking a optimistic view there, right? Because a lot of people, when you bring up AI and jobs, it does tend to be a little bit of a doom and gloom discussion, right?
I used to have the doom and gloom perspective initially, because the initial thought is, oh my gosh, I don't need as many people. People are going to lose their jobs. And it is very trite and demeaning to say, well, what about the buggy whips? They went away. But the reality is those jobs are going to go away, and there will be more interesting jobs for those people with that skill set. It's a hard transition. I mean, I've lost my job before. I know what it's like. I've lost a job without severance.
Sure.
And I know what it's like, and it's not fun.
It is not.
And I had to get creative. I had to go take classes on AI. So, and it's interesting. J.D. Vance is a controversial figure for some people, and he spoke on AI recently, and he mentioned it from the positive perspective of being a job-creating technology. It is. Anytime, if I go look back at the industry that I've been in for way too many decades, as I mentioned earlier, 3 decades, we empowered people. We automated things, and that ultimately empowered people. But that individual that used to do something manually, maybe that individual became more involved in creating the automation that ultimately he no longer had a job because he was doing things manually. It's always a hard transition, but at the end of the day, when we're automating the right things, it becomes empowering, and it does create more jobs, because then there's more cool problems that we can solve.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, like I said, I appreciate that you're taking the positive view of redirecting those resources, financial and people, right, and people's creativity into other things, right, other interests, other projects. We do live in an interesting world where we have these countries making advancements in AI and data centers and GPUs, but then there's countries where maybe not maybe a small portion of the population has clean water, right? Or lives in rural conditions, or things along those lines, right? We still kind of live in that paradox of a world.
And we do. And what I love about the paradox of this world, with the exception of some very small communities and parts of the world that they really don't communicate with the modern world, we kind of know about these places. So my husband and I love to scuba dive, and we go to various places where there are families. I mean, some of these places we go to that just have such a great sense of community. And there's this one area in particular where I just fell in love with this community, and they want to improve their lives. And we're finally at that point where I know about that community. I know about that K through 12 high school. I know what happened in that community when there was a fire that went through. And that community's on my list. And I would even call it a bucket list of, once I finish paying for college for the kids, then that is a community that I want to go back to, get to know them better, and figure out how do we weave STEM education, so science, technology, engineering, math, and art, into their education to empower them to improve their own community. What are the creative projects that can be done there? And then if you can't get funding from your government, okay, we have just a couple billionaires here in the US, and we could probably go find somebody who might want to fund something in that area. So it's a time where when we get to the point where we have more time in our giving back years, and if you go look at anyone in technology, we probably have most of the globe covered as far as knowing of places that we can, as U.S. citizens or as European citizens, go into these communities and bring technology and bring more education so that they don't feel like they need to leave their community to have the richness of life. Yeah. And they live in a vacation place. They live in one of the most beautiful places on earth. Sure. It's like, let's figure out how you don't have to leave this gorgeous place, but empower you to produce and create and to start creating wealth and creating family wealth that you pass down from generation to generation. That's exciting.
I love that you're bringing in that global perspective, because I've been fortunate to travel also, and it does kind of one, it puts our life here in the U.S. in perspective, but two, one of the things I've always wondered is, why do developing countries seem to always stay developing countries, right? And then you think about pick any developing country. If you're there, you're in the middle of an intersection of two dirt roads, or maybe two poorly maintained roads or whatnot. That road's been a dirt road 10 years ago, and it will probably be a dirt road 10 years from now. There's no catalyst that's really going to change that, right? As you say, right? Superman is not coming, right? I mean,
yeah.
So maybe AI is that catalyst where you can redirect some of those, right? Because there's got to be some reason why developing countries stay developing countries, right? There's nothing sparking that change.
You hit on some interesting things, and I look forward to some of the thoughts that pop into my head after our conversation, and I will definitely be reaching out on those. But in many cases, in some cases, I'm sure there are places where they just don't have some of the natural resources. I mean, you look at why is the U.S. where we are? Natural resources. I mean, it's endless, and our cowboy spirit, and those exist in many other places. But think about rare earth metals, since that's the big thing with EVs, all these rare earth metals. Right, and so if you were a country that had cobalt, well, that wasn't valuable 100 years ago. It wasn't valuable 50 years ago. It's valuable now, and sadly, there are a lot of bad people in the world doing a lot of bad things to get their cobalt. And that shouldn't happen in the future.
Sure.
And so there's the aspect of really evil people doing evil things, which has been consistent throughout history. And again, we're at a state from a technology perspective that we know this is going on. And we know that, and we know we know communities all over the world. There are very few communities where someone in the U.S. hasn't been there or seen them, and there's no magical answer. But from our discussion yesterday, maybe we can get to a climate where we do start calling things good and bad. And we do say that we are going to be very intentional in how we as humans treat other humans. And regardless of one's politics or their religion or their color or anything, we should never be doing things that are dehumanizing of others. Sure. So here, okay, I got it. There's the idea. Okay. Here's where AI comes in. Because AI is forcing us to think about, what does it mean to be human? What does it really mean to be human? And how do we treat the other humans in our lives? So I was a Trekkie back in the day. I still am. And I still remember that episode in one of the Star Trek movies. Or no, it was Next Generation. It was the Next Generation movie or an episode where Data finally gets skin, and actually understands what does it feel like to touch something. And he's just a bot, but he's everybody's buddy, and he appears to be human, but he was missing that one key piece. Now, I'm not speculating whether bots are going to get to that point. I can kind of assume that they might. But again, whatever comes out of AI, it is ontologically different than a human. It will never be exactly what we are as humans. It is ontologically different. And I think we're making a mistake in adding emotions and giving the false appearance that this bot is human. I love the idea that we talked about where when I'm interacting with a chat bot, I know whether it's AI or not.
Sure.
I mean, I'm sure there's machine language learning in there somewhere. It's automated somewhere, but if it's actual, generative AI creating that bot, I should know that that's not a human there. And so I think if we can change our focus from stop trying to humanize the dadgum AI bot, it is matrix math, it is an algorithm, and turn that back on ourselves and think about how do we humanize others? How do we bring out the natural creativity in others? And how do we encourage, good emotions? Yeah. If somebody does something bad, they need to be told that. How do we create more one-to-one time amongst humans?
That's good, yeah.
Because the opposite is, I'm not comfortable enough as a human to sit down here and have a conversation with you on topics that we disagree on. So I'm going to go hang out with my little bot over there. That bot's going to tell me I'm perfect. And then we'll never fight because that bot's programmed to tell me I'm perfect. We'll never fight. That is pure evil because it's taking me away from who I am as a human. That's where I think talking about the morality and the ethics around AI is where I think that we can influence some of the people who can go make those changes in developing countries, who can remove the slave masters in whatever countries there are. I mean, there are some countries where it's like if you asked me to go solve the problem of what's going on in that developing country, I would not know where to start.
Sure.
But there are people who know how to make that kind of change.
Sure. Now, I like your mention there as far as are you keeping the human element to it, or are you running off and going into that silo with another bot or whatnot? And that ties into something that I've spoken with my audience about how the best leaders I have seen do not want yes men. They do.
Absolutely.
They do not want sycophants, right?
Yes, exactly.
And that's what you're describing, right?
Yes.
Where I can just go off into a world where everybody tells me I'm perfect.
Yeah.
We never argue because my view is the view.
Right.
And that's terrible. That's terrible from a human development perspective, right? The best leaders out there are gonna sit there and say, okay, what do you think? Well, what do you think? Well, why do you not agree with me? And do that, right? And it's a very healthy process.
Very healthy, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, now that you put it that way, it could be something that we're in danger of losing, right? Because if I'm one of these,
that is key. Man, did you just nail it?
Yeah, because if I'm one of these CEOs, a startup CEO that thinks that AI can solve everything, and my staff, my board, or whoever is partially made up of AI tools, or AI personas, whatever, maybe that's not so great.
I like that. And that's interesting. You just said, my board, like AI could be board members in the future. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's potentially not great.
Yeah. Which then brings it back to the importance of spending time with humans.
Yeah.
And maybe the role of a board member is a role in which AI shouldn't be there. Now, I could have AI go do research that a fellow human board member might normally bring to the table. But when we move away from kind of very somewhat black and white concrete things, and then we move into places where someone needs to have judgment, and someone needs to have some of the characteristics, kind of getting back some of the emotional intelligence, some of the characteristics that we learn over life after making oodles of mistakes, and kind of that wisdom piece. Is that something that we would want to delegate? And that's where I'm like, there's a place where we don't want to delegate certain aspects of our humanity, or delegate certain things that humans can uniquely do that AI can't do. But we know good and well somebody's going to go do it.
Sure.
We're not going to be able. Sure. You're not going to be able to stop that. And so that, again, where it's interesting to take a step back and look at history, and look at areas in which we didn't make wise decisions as it related to technology and where we place technology.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of delegation,
yes,
we are going to be automating more and more things in our lives.
Yep.
Kind of delegating those things, including driving, transportation,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
and autonomous vehicles,
mm-hmm.
and that's also autonomous vehicles and robotics.
Yeah,
all and AI
mm-hmm.
are kind of bundled into the same discussion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How do you feel about automated vehicles or autonomous vehicles?
Autonomous vehicles. Okay, my favorite thing to mention about autonomous vehicles is my garage. In our garage, mm-hmm. we have Tesla Model 3. So we're like 10 years into our Tesla vehicles. We had the S, then we have the 3. We also have Dodge Ram pickup truck. So we've got both. And I have toyed around with some of the self-driving aspects of the Tesla. I love to drive a badass car. Mm-hmm. I love the Tesla because it's such a great car to drive. Mm-hmm. We bought that car because it was such fun to drive, and I could not care less about the autonomous aspect of it. But I don't want to sidetrack our conversation on autonomous vehicles, because they're here, and there are going to be more and more autonomous vehicles. Several interesting questions in this space. And the crux of this is really around, at what point, again, am I going to turn over a decision that a human normally makes? Am I going to give that decision to the AI in the car? Again, it's normally a human decision of everything I'm doing while driving. What aspects of that am I going to allow AI to do? And so it's interesting if we look at, there was a wreck that happened over here, and then that was human caused. There's a wreck over here that was AI caused. Somebody dies in both situations are bad. And so if we approach it from the perspective looking at driving, I think the last stat I saw recently was there are 30,000 deaths on the road per year. And like we talked about it, 30,000 per year, that's roughly 100 a day. So 2 in every state in the U.S., too many. Mm-hmm. It's one thing for a 99-year-old grandmother to die of congestive heart failure versus someone's life taken away too soon. So we don't want that to happen. And that's where when we look at this automotive space, and we look at, perhaps there are companies out there that are playing fast and loose with admitting to their faulty AI causing a problem. Mm-hmm. So what the fun thing is about this is we can use AI to catch those corner cases before that vehicle or that component even goes into that vehicle. And so if we look in at least the automotive space particularly, and there's automotive standards around safety, functional safety is what it's referred to, and there's specific specifications. There's a variety of them, but one that we all know, those of us in the space, 26262. So it's an automotive specification around safety, even around how does your lighting system perform in certain conditions, or and you've got braking and all these different aspects. And so there's this other piece of technology in this space called hardware in the loop testing. So if you go look at any car off the manufacturing line today, all cars have what we call an ECU, an electrical control unit. How many ECUs do you think are in an average car? So think about, you got to control the brakes, and you got to control the lighting, and you got to control the infotainment system. You got to control all these things. So how many ECUs do you think are in an average car?
Well, I'm guessing it's more than one.
More than one.
It probably started as one.
Yeah.
So 3 or 4?
I honestly am not the expert today in this space. I am quickly becoming more knowledgeable in this space, but at least 100, 200, perhaps, depending on the car, or more. And so when we think about, you have these ECUs, so it's basically software. So it's a chip. ECU is nothing more than a chip. So somebody has to write the software. So think about somebody's writing software to control the temperature in the car. Because, I don't want to be cold. It's winter. Tennessee is just as cold as Denver, Colorado to me, and I want to be warm in the car. So there's a little electric control unit. And so somebody wrote an algorithm that is going to control, the heating and the cooling and the fans so that I am perfectly comfortable. If somebody makes a mistake on that, the consequence is I'm not perfectly comfortable. But if it's a braking system, if it's battery management, there are so many of these that actually are controlling aspects of the car that are life and death aspects of the vehicle. So if I'm playing around with a little algorithm and I'll test my algorithm, so I write some code and then I sit down and then I build a simulation, software simulation. But eventually my code is going to go into one of those chips. And the chip, when it's actually in the car, is going to have sensors connected to it. So in the automotive industry, there's this technology called hardware in the loop. So what I used to do 15 years ago is I would go take that one electric control unit or it could be the engine control unit, and I'd go put it in the car and drive the car around the track or wherever and make sure it all worked just fine in a controlled track situation. We can't do that when a car has 100 ECUs in it anymore. So in our industry, we have all this, it's a big piece of equipment, like if you might fill up this whole room here, but it is simulating all of the sensors in the car so that I can test my braking system, and I can test my lighting, and I can test how this ECU is talking to that ECU, and it could be that the ECU that is doing something with my seat accidentally messes out something once you put all these pieces together. So you have a very controlled area or a controlled technology called hardware in the loop where you simulate the actual hardware, and then you simulate this ECU and then that ECU, and then when you put them together, and then when you put the other components of a car together, and making these things more efficient, you can use AI there. And then what you do is you do what is called an industry fault injection. So you simulate more corner cases. You start to simulate those corner cases. Now you kind of have to know about them to actually simulate them, but you simulate all the common things that you know can go wrong. And then over time, you can eliminate the likelihood of the corner case happening and an autonomous vehicle doing something in which a human is hurt or killed. But that involves humans knowing that, hey, we can go test these things. And we do know that once we put these multiple components together and get a subsystem, we need to test the subsystem as if it's actually in a car. And so I think it is, from the design perspective, I think it's intentionality to put that kind of effort into ensuring you have the best possible design that eventually gets manufactured to minimize autonomous vehicles, hurting or killing somebody. Right. And that happens over time. But but that's just the engineering side of it. Again, all of our challenges, the technology is always easy. It's the human part that's hard. Sure. The challenge then is kind of the ethical piece of when something does go wrong, whether it's a ride share or an actual autonomous vehicle, that we do, like when the problem happens, there has to be the appropriate investigation to understand what was the thing that caused it. Yeah. And
well, do you mind if we stop there?
Yeah.
Because you've hit on a couple points there.
Yeah.
So, first of all, thank you for that background, because I think a lot of people don't have that background. It speaks to the wealth of your career. But instead of picking every single part, let's just talk about some of the meta items in there. Okay. So, I love how you talked about the example of somebody approaching an intersection, or I think it was you referencing a friend driving, right? Is the fundamental assumption there would be that all of those things happening in your brain as you're driving, as you're approaching an intersection, a situation, whatever, you're assuming that all of those functions can be quantified in some way. And
bingo, yes.
Right. Because, but that's the part that gets me about AVs, because as you know, I'm not very optimistic on them.
Right.
There's vision, there's memory, there's skill, there's tactile responses, everything that goes into that. Can we quantify those? And then, along the same veins, when you're talking about these test units and the ECUs and the edge cases, can we quantify all the edge cases in driving? Because that's also that assumption there, right? That there is some upper limits or some quantifiable value that you can appoint to those edge cases. Yeah. And I have trouble saying yes to both of those. I don't think they can be quantified. There's a lot that goes into driving, and there's a lot of situations that can happen on any given roads and whatnot. There's a reason why a lot of, it's no secret that Tesla and Waymo, they use simulated miles, simulated driving, right? They're not driving every single mile. Right. But that's because there's a million plus type of situations that can happen. Yeah. But if we look at that scenario, you're assuming that it can be quantified. What if they can't? Yeah.
And so I think you hit on something. And I'm going to say we cannot quantify all those situations. There are going to be edge cases that we cannot quantify, period. And again, it begs the question of, when the edge case happens, who's making the decision? Is there a human making the decision? Or is there a vehicle that has no human in it making the decision? So if we look at autonomous vehicles, there's different levels of autonomy. And I think there's like 5 levels. And the levels kind of talk about where's the human's role in this. And it's a very interesting question. I'm gonna go off on a quick story here, and then we'll come back to answering this, but I'm answering it with this quick story. You had asked earlier in our conversation, where do I go to learn? So one of my favorite places is the All In podcast. So I'm usually gonna laugh, and there's a lot of reasons why you laugh when you watch that podcast. Somehow in every other All In podcast, the subject of the planet Uranus comes up. I'm just going to leave it there. But it always comes up. But it was about a couple of weeks ago, so it was roughly end of January, beginning of February, and they were talking about autonomous vehicles. And one of the topics came up with regards to the catastrophic plane flight where in DC, where the plane and the Black Hawk helicopter collided. And one of the comments made by one of the gentlemen, I'm so sorry, I don't have your name at the tip of my tongue, mentioned that wouldn't it have been better if there was AI in the plane such that the AI took over the controls of the plane to prevent the crash? But then my thinking is, and I honestly don't know my answer to this question, is I think it would be better for AI to tell me, the pilot, that I need to do XYZ so the plane doesn't crash. It could be that if the AI tells me to do something, I'm not in a position to do it. So at some point, is the AI going to make that final decision, or is a human going to make that final decision? And so in the preservation of human life, there may be times where I decide to give up my, my human agency and let the AI make that final decision so someone doesn't die. But at the same time, there are going to be scenarios where my human instincts will be better than the AI at making that decision in that moment. How do we know what those are? So I think you ask a really, really, really good question, and it gets back to this overall topic of human agency. What are the decisions that we need to make? I would not want an AI bot on a board of a company that I'm investing in. Like, I just philosophically, when that happens, I may just choose, I don't want to invest in companies where they put bots on boards. And if I have the ability to choose, if I have the freedom to choose that I don't want to go invest in that company, or I don't want to participate in areas of our world in which I feel that AI is dehumanizing people. If I have that freedom to choose, then I have my human agency. And so I will almost always choose to drive the car, at least for now, while I'm young enough and have the skills to drive the car. I have chosen to never get in a Waymo. Don't know when I ever would. It just makes me kind of nervous, and I don't want to do that. But it becomes when I am forced into doing it, then I lose my human agency at that point. So I'm sidetracking.
And the fun of driving.
Yeah. And there are people that don't want to drive. And there are people that let the Tesla drive them to go drop their kid off at school while they're helping the kid with the homework in the car. Maybe that's, and again, that's their choice until their car hits me. And I think that the most important thing is that you're asking the question and we're having conversations around it. Because then we may be able to find out that, whether, through some advanced testing and things, there'll be certain aspects that the edge cases, we can reduce the number of the edge cases perhaps, but can AI ever replicate my sensory and everything when I'm driving a car? Nope.
Sure. So let's take that one step further, because the other question I also ask, and I've expressed this to you, is in those scenarios where there is an accident, a death, an injury, some sort of liability, it feels like, there's so many components that go into making a car, so many manufacturers, so many legal entities are involved. I can't help but feel that everybody's going to have their fingers pointed outwards when it comes to assigning that liability, when it comes to helping those families taking responsibility. So how do you feel about that, being on the testing side? Because that's really my fear, that it's the liability is going to be hard to come by.
Yeah. My husband's the attorney and I'm not. But it's, and honestly, I'm kind of diving into an area that I don't know real well. So I don't know the legal sphere in how these things happen.
And that's fine. We can just talk about it from the testing perspective.
Yeah. But just from there's many times that we read that, GM got fined, blah, 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 because of XYZ. Something wasn't working. And I don't know how the industry works as it relates to the investigative aspect of there was a wreck, regardless whether it was a human driver or an AI driver, there's a wreck, and we want to go find out what the cause is. My assumption is everybody is figuring out what the cause is, and they know what the cause is. So I can't speculate on the cause is identified, and the entity that should have done more testing and should have done better in engineering is not held accountable. I know there are times out there when someone made a mistake, something happened, and something wasn't caught, but the appropriate entity is not held to account. I'm sure that happens sometimes. And AI is not going to fix that, by the way. But everybody knows what the cause was. And so I assume there's aspects in the legal system, somewhere, someplace where that could be fixed, should be fixed from the legal side. From the testing side, the fact that we do have more and more testing, both when something's manufactured and even when it's designed, and we're incorporating AI so that we can be even more efficient in this process. Over time, as we improve our testing ability, the mistakes will go down. And that's what's exciting. That's what's fun for me. And when I look at the testing, I think about putting myself in the place of an engineer that is designing that electrical control unit and designing the algorithm. And there is a lot of rigor that goes into every component in our cars. And so there's a lot of rigor there. There's a lot of rigor when you put all the components together. And so as an engineer, I may make the safe decision and just tweak something a little bit. If I have the ability to have really sophisticated testing that simulates not just the sensors that are going into an electrical control unit in this hill testing I mentioned, but you have what's called ADAS, where you're going to play back. You record and play back all the road conditions. So the more rigor around the testing of my little component, then I am freed up as an engineer to be even more creative in my design. So one of the things I love about this hardware in the loop space and all of the design testing that we now are able to do that we haven't been able to do in the past is it empowers an engineer to be more creative. That, more than anything else, that's what I love. Like if I can empower someone, an engineer, to be a better engineer, if I can empower anybody else to be more creative and innovate, that is fun. And so that piece of it is real exciting, because then the humans that are doing the tasks that are still today uniquely human, they get to do more, they get to create more. And then they have the safety and the security of knowing that if they make a mistake, because we're always going to make a mistake, and AI makes more mistakes than we do, but when I make that mistake, it will get caught, and then I can go back and change things. The other piece that I think is interesting and from a technology standpoint is just the role of blockchain. Not Bitcoin and crypto, but just the technology behind blockchain. Because the technology behind blockchain, and it's like you have these blocks, and once it gets placed on the blockchain, it is immutable. You cannot change that. And one of the best use, or a very, very good use case for blockchain, is supply chain, because then it would be great if, with my Dodge Ram truck or the Tesla, there was on the blockchain absolutely every component. And so if they found, and the thing that's nice is the ability to go back and find the information. It's really, really fast to be able to go retrieve a lot of the information that might be stored, so then they can go find out, oh yeah, here was the cause. And then they can be even more precise, and it wasn't just this component, it was this piece inside the component. And maybe there was something about the metal that somebody hadn't detected, and there was genuinely no human fault. It was just something we didn't know about. Great, let's find out what that is. So I think looking at each one of these bits of technology that go into where we are today with autonomous vehicles, and again, putting the humans in the primary role of decision maker and ensuring that we're empowering humans, then we work through some of these things.
So we've covered a lot of ground with tech and your experience, and I love the new perspectives you're bringing because I think it's a very unique experience. But let's talk also a little bit about, kind of just your own general views and Nancy's view on the world. So I'll ask you a couple questions that I like to ask everybody. If you could talk to any historical figure about AI, what would you talk? Who would you choose, and what would you talk about? What would you do?
I'm going to pick two.
Okay.
I keep talking about Dr. Joseph Weizenbaum, who wrote Computer Power and Human Reason, and he's the gentleman who had created the ELIZA program.
Okay.
I would absolutely love to sit down with Dr. Weizenbaum and have some of the similar conversations that he presents in his book. And I would love to come to sit down with him and ask him these use cases. The exact use case of the autonomous vehicle. Okay, there's going to be times where the AI could make the right decision. There's going to be times when the human makes the right decision. And I would love to walk with him through some of the things that are in his book, that were in his brain, that are not in the book, and see where he would land on some of these difficult questions. And that would be fascinating. It's like, of course, I would love to know what Jesus would say. Sure. I would absolutely love, because.
Well, let's not leave the doctor just yet.
Okay, let's go with the doctor.
Yeah,
okay.
Because it kind of ties into what we were just talking about. Yeah. If his era is like the 50s, 60s, 70s, you're probably a student before that. That was more the utopian cities. Right, that was the view back then. At the World Fair, it was always the utopian city with the car,
yes.
Right?
Bingo, yes.
But here we are. It's not a utopian city.
Yeah.
So maybe he would find that a little bit of a contradiction, right? Where, well, what do you mean you need autonomous cars? Don't you have people movers? Right, like the old Disneyland people mover. Right?
Yeah.
That's what they thought we'd be in.
Yeah, that one's interesting, and I want to tie it back into Jesus here in a second,
okay, yeah.
but because I think it gets to the crux of it. But I could, and if I think I hear what you're saying, there was an aspect of society in that day that it was utopia. It was Ward and June Cleaver, and everybody had a happy family, and everything was good in the world. I think that's where you're coming from a little bit.
Well, it was more about, like, that was their vision of the future.
Their vision of the future,
right?
of utopia.
Yeah, like when you see the old black and white films on the World Fair. The World Fair was always about, hey, in the year 2000, it'll be people movers on these dedicated roads.
Okay.
That's more what I mean.
Okay, so that's a little different. So that society at the time that they are picturing the future of technology,
right.
They're picturing utopia,
right.
And the perfect society.
Right. So wouldn't Dr. Joseph kind of find it funny that you're asking about autonomous vehicles? Because what do you mean they need to have their own special AI? Don't they just move with the rails that are integrated into the road and they talk to each other? He
would pull it apart, slice by slice.
Okay.
Because he had a very, very good sense. Like we talked about, what are the things that you want to delegate to AI or to a computer or to automation, to non-human automation, and what do you not want to? Mm-hmm. So, and this brings up a great ethical question, because I was reading one magazine that was projecting, what if we had robots that could go visit the elderly who don't have someone to come visit them? Mm-hmm. That sounds wonderful. He would have a problem with that, mm-hmm. because he felt that if it's putting automation, putting AI in places that where the knowledge, and that can be emotional knowledge or whatever, is derived uniquely as humans, that's not where you want AI to play. You don't want AI to be your psychotherapist. So when he built ELIZA, he would not advocate that anyone ever go to AI for psychotherapy. Mm-hmm. Somebody else might argue and say, well, what if it helps people because we don't have enough psychotherapists? That's where you have to think about the trade-offs of what happens when you go down that path. Mm-hmm. And so with regards to the elderly person, what we need is we need somebody putting energy into, let's get more kids off the frickin' phone and they can go play cards with somebody at this skilled nursing place. And my mom was in skilled nursing or assisted living and then in skilled nursing for like 5 years. And there were not enough of us in there spending time with our elderly. And if we if we had that deep sense of respect for human dignity, like we say we do, but we're not always perfect at, we would be solving that problem with humans and not even thinking about solving it with AI. And then it brings up, and I realized this last night at some point. I think when we make these decisions, and this is why we all need to have a philosophy of AI, we need to understand our own personal worldview. What is my worldview? So I'm a Christian, and so my worldview is Jesus is who he said he was. And so part of that worldview is the fact that I know I'm not perfect, and I will never be perfect. I mean, the only perfect human was Jesus. And I always try, and thanks to the grace of God, I do improve certain aspects of who I am over time, but I'm not going to be perfect. I cannot be perfected. No human can be perfected. And so that's the worldview that I have, that I bring to these conversations. And I think that's why the founders of this country, they weren't all Christians. Some of them were deists, but they were all kind of biblically informed, Old Testament or New Testament. And so when you have these three branches of government that can have checks and powers on each other, it's because they knew that humans weren't perfect. They fully respected the fact that in their view, the best possible type of democracy was this representative form of government where we had the three branches of government. And it was the checks on whether or not, because one branch is going to do something bad and evil, so you got to have a check and balance on that. And so I think I take that, and then I look at this perception that technology is going to bring in nirvana and everything's going to be perfect. No. Can we use technology to solve today's problems and make life better for citizens? Yes, that's what humans have been doing since the beginning of humanity, is we consistently are doing things in which we can make life better for others, in which people can, even if you're poor, you can still eat. You can still have your kids get educated. Even the poorest of the poor, most of them still have a smartphone somewhere. And I once read a paper in 8th grade. I had a fantastic 8th grade teacher. His name was Binger Dixon. And his stance was, even the poorest of poor today have much more than the kings of the past had. So anytime, we go look at, okay, what was life like 200 years ago? There are more people that thrive, are free, and having families and just living life with comfortably, without the threat of getting eaten by some animal or, killed by something than ever before. And so there's the part that I think about where, okay, we got the Jetsons down there, and technology is going to bring in utopia. We're going to screw it up because we're humans, because we're not perfect. And I think it's that acknowledgement that we're going to screw it up that makes us think, well, maybe if we made a decision back then, given certain situations, maybe we need to revisit it again. And I think our best possible way of looking at it is to always put our humanity and the uniqueness of us as humans front and center in our philosophy and in our decision making. So I wonder what kind of parable Jesus would have if he were here today.
About AI.
Yeah. I mean, he'd have some wicked parables because he had the most amazing parables and told the most amazing stories that made everybody go, regardless of whether or not someone is a Christian or not, regardless of whether or not people even think he walked the earth, the stories that are ensconced of the parables that he told just make you go, And I bet he would not be pro AI, he would not be against it, but he'd make us think about it.
Which is a good thing.
Which is a good thing. We just need to think about it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So speaking of thinking, so here's another question I ask everybody. I give you a magic microphone where you can talk to the entire world for 5 minutes on one concept. And it can be AI, it can be anything you want. Maybe there's something you want to clear
So
up.
this is outside of our conversation on AI right now.
It's on anything. Maybe you are so passionate about AI that you would use, because it's a powerful 5 minutes, right?
Yeah.
To talk. Maybe you would want to use, maybe you want to use it for something else. But you can talk to the entire world.
I would give the microphone to Jesus, or I would ask Jesus to tell me the story that I would tell everybody. 5 minutes on any topic.
You get 5 minutes. The whole world has to listen to you. What do you tell people? Maybe some people would want to help clear up a misconception or get some positive message out there, like an encouragement. What would you choose?
Food.
Okay.
I would talk about food, and it would be within the context of, and that just popped in my head. You ask me the same question tomorrow, it'll be something different.
Okay, that's good.
We can't live without it. We derive joy from it. We make a lot of unhealthy decisions about it.
Sure.
But like, food's amazing. The amount of creativity that goes into it, the fact that there's no way that I can duplicate Nana's chicken, and Nana's chicken might be better than Nashville chicken. I'm just saying, I might get in trouble for saying that, but Nana's chicken is probably better than Nashville chicken.
So we're talking Texas chicken here.
No, Nana lived all over the place.
Okay.
This is my husband's mom. This is my mother-in-law.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so she's Nana to her grandkids. But it's, and the reason why I would pick food is because AI doesn't need food. Food is such a human thing. And it's the thing we get together to eat food together. Like, most people don't go out to dinner by themselves. I'm that rare exception where I'm totally cool. Like, I was at the Redneck Riviera last night, went by myself, sitting there by myself, eating the chili, enjoying everything and talking to people. Most people don't do that. But food is one of those things that unites us. It's at dinner time, hopefully we sit down as a family. And anybody can do it. Anybody can cook. And it blows me away to think about, in our society today, we don't appreciate the fact that our moms and our grandmas back in the day, they had to learn to cook. There was no McDonald's down the street. And they had to learn how to can. But when you look at history, you look at all these festivals, talking about Jesus, back in Jesus' day, the festivals. And they didn't have all of our modern conveniences. And it was still this, food is this amazing thing that it's part of what makes us human. I spent 5 minutes talking about food.
That's interesting, because I think about that also, in the sense that, I'm fascinated by the commonalities that human cultures have across the world.
Yeah.
And I have like this informal list of things that I keep in mind, that my observations about what we all do that makes us all human.
Keep going.
So one of them is a hot beverage, right?
Yes.
There is no culture out there that doesn't either consume coffee or tea.
Right.
You cannot find that, right?
Yeah.
So to me, it's things like that I do find fascinating. Like
I got one for you.
Okay.
Everybody has a pierogi. Everybody has something, or I don't pronounce it correctly, but in Indian food, the samosa.
Yeah.
Samosa,
yeah.
love them.
Yeah.
Pierogi,
Yeah. What's the U.S.
empanada,
Empanadas, okay.
hot dog. Okay, hot dog's not quite it, but everybody has something that you have a flour-based bread, and you got something on the inside.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, beyond food, maybe you can help me come up with more.
Creme brulee. You got creme brulee, you got flan. Not everybody has it, but again, it's the same thing. It's exactly what you're talking about. Is that those commonalities across? Yeah.
So, focusing again more on the human side, and also you, you're going into a new role.
Yes.
You have a TED Talk.
Yes.
So lots
Now,
of
let me be clear, TEDx. So I have not been on the TED stage. It's a TEDx talk, and the title is Engineering Creativity on Demand, where engineering basically means a process, and it's about understanding the basics of creativity so you can just be more creative in your daily life. Yeah, so I have the TED Talk, TEDx talk.
So is that something you're looking to do more of as far as public
Yes.
speaking or whatnot?
Yeah, that's, and I'm rolling into, the other thing is I'm an empty nester.
Oh, okay.
I have time again.
Okay.
There's no more lacrosse practices, and kids have flown the coop. Most of them are off the payroll, and so my focus is on this new role that I'm going to be starting soon. I'm super excited because there's just so many brilliant engineers to be working with and solving some of these AV problems. And so speaking on human creativity, whether it's speaking or workshops, I really want to lean into that with my free time, and in particular, as it relates to AI, one of the things I want to do, I simply haven't done it yet, is I want to spend more time working with women so they understand the space. Because the last thing you want as a small business owner, woman business owner, is have some dude come in and mansplain you about AI. So I think in particular, working with women in that and understanding AI and even the whole thing on helping people just create your philosophy around AI. Mm-hmm. So I think that would just be a blast. So that's the side gig, and then the end goal is the STEM and helping bring science, technology, engineering, and math into underprivileged communities. Whether it's a community back down the street from me, whether it's a local juvenile detention center, whether it's some island where my husband and I dive. In 10 years down the road, that's definitely where I would love to be playing.
Awesome. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Any other messages or anything else you want to get out before we wrap up?
I would encourage people to think. Learn from our ancestors. Mm-hmm. Learn from somebody who's not alive anymore, who wrote an amazing book. It's really interesting, and I don't know who advocated this, but if you go way back before the printing press, mm-hmm. There was somebody specific that mentioned this, and I don't know who it was, but society was concerned about how books would be dehumanizing, mm-hmm. because we would no longer gather in the parlor or the living room and have conversation. We'd have our head stuck in the book and not want to talk to anybody. And that's the exact same thing going on today. Our ancestors, I would encourage people to learn from our ancestors. Go talk to your grandma and your grandpa, your mom and dad. Learn from them and learn to be a critical thinker. Don't assume that your favorite politician, whether he's orange or green, is speaking the absolute truth. Mm-hmm. Learn to have a good BS detector, and you get that just by challenging yourself, spending more time with humans, learning from others, and just learn to be a critical thinker and pursue truth in that process.
I love that. What a great way to wrap everything up. We've had such great, wide-ranging conversations.
Yeah.
So I want to really appreciate your time, and thanks for being with us.
I want to thank you too. And I did not get a chance to ask you as many questions as I would love to ask, but I really appreciate your heart for people and for others.
Thank you.
And being a leader and even in your data science space, you challenge people. It's like, no, you're not going to be a data scientist overnight. Right. There are kids out there that need to hear that message.
Sure.
And that message is spoken in love, and it's spoken from the place of, I've walked this path. I want to help you walk this path well. And that's what I see you doing. I think that's fantastic.
Well, we're trying.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much for that. Really appreciate that. Again, appreciate all the time we spent together.
Yeah, I do too. I appreciate the challenges. I appreciate that we can get to answers by coming at a topic from different perspectives, and that's fantastic.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nancy.
Thank you.